We are live.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. Welcome to the Applanga webinar to introduce our new branching feature. I'm really excited to kick off our webinar to showcase this highly anticipated and very frequently requested feature. My name is Aisha Amin, and I am one of the customer success managers at Applanga. My job is to help users use the platform effectively and efficiently. I also help users learn the ins and outs of Applanga. I'll help with any issues that may come up while localizing your projects. If you ever have any questions, run into any problems, anything at all really, I'm here to help. And joining me today behind the scenes is Christian Shanka. He is the CEO and co-founder of Applanga. He's the man behind the curtains today to help us with a smoothly run webinar and with any questions that may come up as we progress through all of our content for today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Okay, so with our intros out of the way, we can go ahead and move on to the agenda for today's webinar. We do have a packed agenda for today. Branching is a huge feature and it touches on so many components of Applanga. So hopefully we'll cover them all and answer any questions you may have along the way. Right. So first, I'll give a quick overview of the feature, and then I'll briefly cover some common branching use cases. Then we'll get into the how-tos, like how to create a project with branching enabled, how to migrate an existing project to a branching configuration, how to manage your project branches, how to create orders based on branches, things like that. We'll also cover merging branches and all that can entail, as well as some things to consider with your branched projects, right? Last but not least, we'll also go over branch availability based on your current Applanga license tier. As you can tell from the agenda, I have a lot of information to share with you guys today. So as we progress through the webinar, please do add your questions to the chat. Christian's going to monitor the chat, and he's going to collect your questions as we go along. We did reserve the last like 10 to 15 minutes to answer any questions you may have. Now, if you miss anything because of an urgent email or call, maybe you're working from home and you have kids or pets in the background, it's no worries. As Christian just said, we're recording this webinar. Then after the call, probably later this afternoon, I'll send out a link to the webinar recording as well as links to our documentation on branching. Right. So let us jump right in. Branching is a brand new feature on Applanga. A lot of our users expressed interest in it and they asked for it specifically. In a pretty short summary, this feature empowers your teams to improve their collaboration and streamline localization workflows on Applanga. So with branching, you can now easily mirror your local environment in Applanga, and hopefully that provides you with more flexibility and efficiency in managing your Applanga projects. So with branching, teams can work on multiple branches or versions in parallel without interfering with each other's work. Branches can be handled so that they essentially act as a unique copy of a project within the overall project. As an example, each branch can contain different languages, different keys, different screenshots, different tags. There's a lot of flexibility there. Once development on a branch is completed, you also have the option to merge branches together, and then you get to determine which changes are saved to the main branch. Applanga integrations can also be configured to point to specific branches of the Applanga project, and how you configure that depends on how branches in your Applanga project should mirror your application's development processes, release management cycles, or just your general app environment. You can also configure your integrations with multiple branches. So as an example, your development environment could be integrated with a development branch of a project. And then your production environment can be integrated with a production branch of that same Applanga project. Okay. So speaking of integrations, branching is currently only available for some of the Applanga integration options. So that's going to be our iOS and Android SDKs, all of the Applanga design tool plugins, Sketch, Figma, Adobe XD. It's also available for the Applanga CLI and API integrations. That being said, the Applanga development team is working pretty hard to enable branching for our other integrations, like the React Native, Flutter, and Unity SDKs, as well as the GitHub integration. Yep. So now that you know a little bit about branching on Applanga, let's get started with some common use cases for the branching feature. This isn't an exhaustive list, it's just some of the most commonly requested use cases or most commonly requested reasons for branching on Applanga. One of the main advantages of this new feature is it helps teams and users better organize continuous integration and continuous delivery environments with a special emphasis on your localization workflows. So let's jump right in. Okay. So our first possible use case is using the feature to align with a typical development, staging, and production environment setup, or you could cover even more environments if needed. Teams can use one branch to manage the production version of an app's content, and then a separate branch to manage the development version, or multiple branches to cover everything in between, but it's all under one Applanga project. In this case, each team member can work on their own branches or versions of the project without interfering with each other's work. You could even extend this to cover localization at the design stage. You could have a branch for designers and a branch for developers.
And maybe to add to the environment, sorry, I forgot to just realize what I wanted to add there. So, and then we had this use case, some of you might be familiar, we had this use case where people emulate that either with draft and target and like having a draft and target value, right, that we have in projects to then publish draft and target, or even having multiple products and synchronizing between them. But with the branching setup, now bringing something from your dev environment to production just is the merge functionality of the branching feature. So you just merge your dev environment into the production environment and thereby promoting your dev changes to production, which is the same process you also do with your code base. So you can basically just merge your code base to production, merge your Applanga dev branch to production, and thereby making it available. So you don't have to publish anymore or copy paste between projects or synchronous projects. You can just merge one to the other. That's also pretty familiar with how your other environments probably work. Just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Christian. So that brings us into our next potential use case, and that is for versioning. The branching feature can be used for versioning, hence why you'll often hear us say branching and versioning. This case allows teams to manage separate versions of an app, right? You can manage, or excuse me, you can maintain different versions simultaneously, like having version 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and so on, right? So as an example, teams can fix something in one version without impacting any other version. The translations of your releases can also be essentially frozen in time, right? So you can also go back for documentation or compliance purposes. You can even enable read-only branches to help with the general stability of an app version. Um, Different branches can also be allocated to each release, allowing teams to get a head start on translation work for upcoming releases without impacting the current version or latest updates to the Applanga connected app software or product. This is also a great option for teams using one of the Applanga SDKs with the hopes to launch new languages. You could start translation work for a new language, then merge to the main branch whenever you're ready to launch. In addition to versioning, you can also use this new feature to manage your software or product's release cycles. You could also use it for new but limited access features, or even for white labeling if you have customer specific versions of your product or software. Right. So the next use case or example is for teams with extensive testing requirements. Branching essentially replaces drafts and draft mode. You can kind of think of it as you can actually have multiple drafts, right? But in each different branch. So instead of drafts, you can use branches to test out and review proposed translations. We're not getting rid of the SDK enabled draft mode itself. It's just going to be repurposed. Testers and reviewers will still be able to access draft mode, but in place of draft translations, they can actually preview translations from a specific branch in the app. I do want to say here that we're not completely getting rid of draft and target translations if your workflow requires them. So you will still have that option if you need them. Right. So last but not least, branching is great for teams that are learning their way around Applanga. You can create a branch specifically for testing Applanga features, assessing how a feature would work in your workflow, or testing workarounds without impacting the entire project. This can help prevent costly delays on translation workflows even when you're training new team members, assessing new features, or testing out a new workaround. Alrighty. Okay, so that summarizes some potential use cases. Like I said, it's not an exhaustive list. It's just some of the use cases that we came up with based on requests for this feature. Right. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's switch to the how-to portion. So I'm gonna pull up, whoops. I'm going to try to pull up, here we go. One of my demo projects. So, or one of my demo accounts, so we can walk through quite a few of the branching how-tos. Christian, can you guys confirm that you can see my screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yes, I can see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so let's dive right in. The first thing I want to show you guys is how to create a new branching project. This is when you're starting a branching project from scratch. So you can click the handy dandy add project button, or if you're on another page, you can click this projects drop down and then click create project. Right. We'll give our project a name. Just as a helpful little tip here, please always be very specific with your project names. If you have the just Applanga project 1, 2, 3, it's quite difficult for your team members to be able to place what each project corresponds to. So please be as specific as you can when you're naming your projects. All right. I'll select my base language, English is fine, and then I need to confirm my team. In this case, I'm going to use the paper company branching webinar. Okay. So I have my usual create new project, but I also have this create new branching project. Now, I do want to say here, you will only be able to see this option for branching projects if branching has been enabled for your Applanga account license. So if after the webinar you don't see this option, that's to be expected. It's not a bug or anything. You'll need to reach out to support and ask them to enable branching for you, right? So don't freak out if you don't see this button. That is to be expected. You will need to reach out to ask for branching, right? So let's go ahead and let's create this new branching project. Account is locked. Well, that's embarrassing. Let's see what happened here. Worked just fine yesterday.
Let me have a quick look there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Scott. Michael Scott. And what's up there? Oh yeah, it's locked. Try again.
Okay, who
Let me
locked
refresh the
me?
page.
Okay, let's see.
Probably me in an overzealous effort to lock some accounts that I'm not familiar with. Yeah, I used the email address for it. So
All right, let's try
yeah.
it. There we go. So if you guys ever have your account locked, please also reach out to support, and we can help you get unlocked. But anyways, where was I? Okay, so I created my branch project, right? And now it's the same way you would typically set up a regular project, right? I can come in and I can manually import files to my project, or I can go through the view integration option and select the integration that I want to use. I'm not going to do that right now. I just want to show you how to create a new branch project. So now I'm going to go to my project. Right, and largely it looks the same. It's just there's this new panel here. This is where you can kind of manage your branches in your project, right? So you see my active branch. If I use this drop down, I can switch between branches. I can merge branches, create new branches, but let me switch to a different project that has a little bit more content in it, and we can use that to kind of demo everything. Actually, let me show you guys this one, and I can show you how to migrate an existing project to branching, and then I can show you everything else. So this is a regular project, right? This is how all your projects exist right now. I don't have that fancy panel for branching, and I do have drafts and target translations in here. So when I am ready to migrate to branching, what I can do is I can go to my project settings page, and there's a handy dandy button, convert to branch project. It'll ask you if you're sure, because once you migrate a project, from your legacy setup to a branch project, this is irreversible. You will not be able to go back. So let's confirm. We'll give it a second to think. And there we go. Now I have a branched project. So once you have a branch project, you're going to have some extra project settings, right? It'll be all in this panel right here. You do have a default branch. So among all the branches in your project, one has to be designated as the default branch. You can think of this as your main or master branch, but the default branch is a branch shown by default when you open the project in the Applanga dashboard. And I'll show you that in just a second. But if you wanted to, you could switch between your default branches. So I could switch it to something else. I don't want to, but I could. You have your branch name here. Oh, go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say like it also maybe you come to it, but it also has an integration impact, the default branch. Would you maybe touch on that later, or should I just elaborate for a second?
I do touch on it later, but we can plug it now too. So as Christian was saying, with your default branch, your integrations will automatically point to the default branch unless you specify otherwise in your in your integration configuration. In your integration configuration, you can point to a different branch. You'll actually need the branching ID if you want to point to a different branch. Otherwise, if you leave your integrations as is, it will point to the default branch.
Yeah, that's basically so that even if you would migrate your project from your current draft target variant, like you see all your projects, if you would migrate it this way, as we just have shown, everything would still work, just with the caveat that whatever is in your default branch now for all the integration data will take from it, like basically that is the published state of your application. And for all the other branches, if you wanted your integration to get anything from them, to upload to them, from them down to them, then you would have to specify it. But basically that we use that mechanism to make sure that even if you would like to migrate your project to branching, you don't have to touch all your old SDK integration or whatever that don't use it yet. It would just still go to the default branch. So there is a non-breaking way to migrate your project in Applanga to branching without having to go around and make everything backward compatible. It still works even with older SDK versions and everything. Yeah.
Thanks, Christian. Let's see, where were we? Okay, so if you do need, or if you do want to configure your integration to point to a different branch, you can grab the branch ID from here, right? There's a handy dandy clipboard or copy button, so I can just click that to copy my branch ID to my clipboard. The next is the editing rights. So with branching and versioning, you can actually limit users with the role translator/reviewer to only be able to edit certain branches. So in this case, the translator/reviewer roles can only edit my draft branch. They can't edit my main branch. Now, these are maybe not the most helpful or useful branch names. So if you do want to mirror your local environment, what you can do is you can actually change the name of the branch. So maybe you want to rename it to master or main and dev, or production and dev. You can rename your branches here as well. All right. You can merge branches from here as well, but I'll show you how that looks from the actual project page. And you can create additional branches here as well. So if I wanted to, I could create a branch here. When you do create a branch, again, you got to give it a name. Maybe you want dev. And then when you're creating a branch, you do have to base it on one of your existing branches. So maybe I want to base it off of my draft branch. So then once I click create branch, give it a second to think. And now I have 3 branches in this project, right? I'm going to scroll down and click update to save my settings. So now we're back on the project page. Now that we've migrated this from a legacy setup to a branched project, we have the branching panel here. I can switch between the different branches here. So when I migrated, all my target translations were moved into the main branch, and all my draft translations moved into the draft branch. So if I switch here, and I can switch between the branches using this drop down. If I were to click this manage button, that would take me into the project settings where we just were, where it would show you all of those branching options. Whenever I'm ready to merge branches, if I've completed development on a branch, I can merge them here, and I could create a new branch here as well. Before I show you merging, I just want to show you one more thing. Let's pop into, oh, what branch am I in? Okay, down. So if I open the editor, I can also switch between branches here in the breadcrumbs. So I went from dev to draft, and I can go from draft to main. Okay. And if I switch to another language, let's try French. You'll notice that, well, it still says draft here, but typically when you're working in the editor and you create a new translation, you'll have the option to save and then an option to publish. Since branching gets rid of draft versus target, you're only going to have the option to publish here. You won't have a draft or a save option anymore. Right. Yes, discard my changes. Right. So let me go back to my project page. So through development, you're probably going to end up with some differences between your main, draft, and dev branches, right? Maybe your main is kind of like You don't really touch that one. All of your development is going into your dev branch. And once you've completed development, you might want to merge your dev into main. So whenever you're ready to merge branches, you click this merge branch button. And we need to select which changes we want to merge into main. So in this case, I want to select dev. Now what's going to happen here is it's going to start a merge calculation. What will happen is Applanga will actually compare all the changes made between the two branches so that you kind of are aware of what's happening before you actually start the merge. Right? So now it's calculated the differences here, right? And once I'm finally ready to merge, what I would do is click the show button, and it's going to ask you, do you want to keep your changes or resolve the merge conflicts using your dev branch or using your main branch, right? And then if you do make any additional changes after starting the merge calculation, you could actually delete and then start again. Essentially, a new merge calculation would go through all your changes to make sure that everything is included in the scope of the merge. Okay. I'm not going to merge right now because it can take a second, and I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint so we can take a deeper dive into how merging branches works on Applanga. Actually, oh, I forgot one thing. Should have checked my checklist. Let me show you how to create an order based on branches. Actually, yes, let me delete this now. Yes, delete. Okay, so you also have the option to create orders based on branches. So you would click your order translations button, right? And then you can actually order per branch, right? It's going to default to whichever your default branch is, but you can switch between the branches and create translation orders based on the different branches. Right, let me double check my checklist and make sure I didn't miss anything else. Okay, got it all this time. So now let's switch back to their PowerPoint and we can talk a little bit more about merging. Okay. So in some cases, your branches might stay completely separate inside a project, and the branching feature can definitely be used for that. But more often than not, at some point, you'll probably need to merge branches. So as an example, kind of like what we just saw, the content in your development branch might need to be promoted or merged into your production branch. So it's important to note that a merge isn't just an import and overwrite. Applanga will actually consider all the changes made to each branch, and then it will combine those changes into the same branch through merging, right? Depending on the project, the merging process has to consider several different data points, not just your translations, not just your source text, but maybe tags, metadata field values, groups, all kinds of things to consider. So this means when you start the merging process, Applanga performs a merge calculation, which is what we just saw when I was trying to merge my branches. So the merge calculation will only take changes into account if those changes were made before the merge calculation actually started. So if you have additional changes after the merge calculation starts, you do have to start a new merge calculation to ensure all changes are included in the scope. Now, in some cases, there might be changes to an element in scope of the merge. So for an example, a translation or maybe a source text, you have changes in both the branches, and that results in a merge conflict. The merging process isn't going to pick one change over the other, but it's actually going to ask you as a user to decide which version to keep, kind of like what we just saw earlier when I was demoing the merge, right? So let's dive into an example, right? Let's say you have a default branch called main in your project, and then you later create a new branch based on main and call it dev. When you create dev, it contains the same content as main, but as you continue your development and localization processes, you'll eventually have some differences between the two branches, right? So eventually changes are made in the dev branch, right? Here we have key one. The source has changed from hello user to hello friend. Um, so now when you're ready to merge your dev branch into the main branch, you get that, you start your merge calculation, and then before you can actually merge, it will ask you, do you want to keep the version that you see in your dev branch, or do you want to resolve conflicts based on what is in your main branch? So if we were to select to resolve any merge conflicts using the dev branch, what would happen is, once merging is complete, key one in the main branch, the value would also be hello friend. Right. So now that you guys know some of the how-tos, some of the use cases, and have a better idea of merging, let's go ahead and cover some effects, considerations, stipulations, just general things to keep in mind whenever you're using branching in your projects. Right. So one of the biggest considerations is that branching is irreversible. That means if you migrate your projects from the standard or legacy setup with drafts and target translations to a branching configuration, this process cannot be reversed. You'll always have a branch project moving forward. And the same is vice versa. If you create a branched project to start with, and later you want to have drafts and target values in your project, it's not possible to kind of work your way backwards, right? It will always be a branched project. So before you migrate all of your projects to branching, you may want to migrate a test project or create a copy of an existing project and then migrate that copy so you have a better understanding of how branching works before you commit all your projects to this setup. Eventually, branching will become the default project setup. However, we will provide the option for teams to keep the legacy of draft and target translations if it's required or helpful for your workflows. Alrighty, so that brings me to the next consideration is for the default or main branch, which Christian expanded upon earlier, but I'll cover it again just to be safe. By default, the main branch is where all the integrations will point to, unless you specify others in your integration configuration. So if you migrate an existing project to branching, your integrations will point to the default branch. It just makes it a little bit easier for you to migrate to branching without having to update each and every single integration that you're currently using. But if you want an integration to point to a different branch, you will need to update the integration configuration um, as outlined in the integration documentation on our website. Each integration documentation section has a subsection on how branching works with that specific integration. Um, Another thing to keep in mind for default or main branches is that backups only exist for the default branch. This is a current limitation, and the development team is working to expand backups to cover all branches. So you will be able to eventually create backups per branch. Okay. The last big consideration is that many components or features of Applanga are branch specific. There's really obvious ones like languages and custom languages, keys, including linked and unlinked keys, screenshots, source text and translations, statuses and comments, translation orders, imports and exports of files, as well as your integrations, right? But then there's features that I think are a little more nuanced when it comes to branching. The first one I think is tags. Tags are going to be branch specific, including the tags themselves, as well as the association with keys, right? In your main branch, you can have a tag that's associated with 5 keys, but in your dev or draft branch, that same tag can be associated with 20 keys, right? And the tags themselves are branch specific. So you can have a tag in your main branch that doesn't exist in your dev or draft branch and vice versa. Right. The next one is going to be metadata fields. So metadata field values are branch specific, but metadata fields as well as custom metadata fields are not. So all metadata fields, both custom and default, are available across all branches in a project, but those values that you add to those metadata fields, those are going to be branch specific. Right. The next one is the changelog that is also branch specific. Changelogs are also merged together when you merge 2 branches together. And there's going to be a few branching specific entries you'll see when you merge branches, right? The last big one is going to be groups. Groups are branch specific, including how many groups are in a branch, as well as which keys are in which groups. So that is all going to be dependent on the branch. Now, if branches are merged with differences in the groups, this will generate a merge conflict, which you'll have to resolve before you can complete merging. That's the same with almost all of these. If there's differences between the groups, tags, metadata fields, anything really between your branches, that's going to generate that merge conflict, and then you'll need to resolve that using whichever branch you want to keep those changes for so that you can complete the merging process, right? So now that you know some of the ways branches can be used, let's go over the availability of this new feature. Um, Now, this slide is more of a guideline based on your existing license, and these numbers are not set in stone. We're always happy to be flexible with you guys so you have the branching options you need to effectively manage your projects. All that being said, the number of branches available per project is based on your Applanga license tier. So if you're on a free trial, you'll get 1 branch per project. Pro, you'll get 3 branches per project. Growth, 5 branches per project. And enterprise, it's customized, right? It depends on your existing contract. Like I mentioned earlier, these are just general guidelines. Depending on the specifics of your Applanga license and contract, you may have fewer or greater than what's outlined here. If you have questions about pricing, please check with your TransPerfect sales account manager, and we can work with them to accommodate your branching needs. Right. So if you are interested in branching, you do need to reach out to support and ask them to enable it on your behalf. You can email support@applanga.com to start the process, or you can use the website support chat in the bottom right corner of the website. Um, I want to say, please give us as much information as you can. At the very least, like a link to the team on Applanga or which company you're with, or maybe the owner of your team, so it's easier for us to configure branching for you. Um, just as a gentle reminder, branching must be enabled by support before you can use it. If you try to create a branch project or migrate to branching right after this webinar, you're not going to be able to. It's not a bug. It's just that the feature hasn't been enabled for you yet. And again, please consider creating a test project to experiment with branching before you commit all your projects to branching. As I said, this is a one-way migration. So once you've converted your project from that draft and target setup to a branching setup, you can't go back, right? So one last thing before we get to questions, we do have a lot more branching features on the horizon. So coming soon, we've got read-only branches. The project settings page is going to get a facelift or a redesign. So it'll be a little bit better organized, a little bit easier to use. The development team is still working on branching for all integrations, right? The React Native, Unity, SDKs, Flutter, and same with GitHub. There'll be a new feature to copy keys between branches. Maybe it'll be one less thing to worry about when it comes to merging. We're also working on the ability to review changes before you merge. And then I think I mentioned this earlier, but backups for branching. All right. So that's some of the features that you can expect. The development team is working pretty hard, so hopefully we're able to roll these out. Some of them will be sooner than others, but you can keep an eye out whenever we do a big deployment with release notes. You'll be able to see what's out. All right. Okay, so that's all I have on the agenda for today's webinar. I know we covered a lot of stuff and I shared a lot of information with you guys. And this is obviously a brand new feature, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll open the floor for questions. I think I saw a couple come in through the chat. Christian, what have we got?
Yeah. So like we have some questions still popping up, but the earliest one that I haven't answered in the chat yet was around the GitHub integration, and that is still currently being worked on. The plan is to have that by end of this month. However, it depends really on how you integrate with GitHub. We have many people integrating in different ways. We have a specific GitHub Actions integration that you can set up via the dashboard, and only that one does not work with branching it. If you integrate in any other way, API, SDK, CLI, even though your code might be on GitHub right now, that can still be make use of the branching feature and then connect there individually. The only part that is not there, if you talk about GitHub, is our specific integration that can be configured there. Please reach out if you actually use that one and about the specific tenant and your use case. It's pretty complicated to basically configure that in the dashboard and click through your branches. We still try to figure out what is the best way for somebody to click that all together, and then what happens if you create more branches and GitHub automatically. All of that we are still working on to get to the point, maybe eventually, where whenever you create a new branch on your repository, also a new branch in Applanga is created. Obviously, there's the pricing impact, right? And a performance impact at some point, and then also kind of like a housekeeping impact. So for now, we also look into Q4 to build more features that enable branching management, like deleting, resetting, renaming branches via API as well. Right now, this all has to be done via the dashboard. And then was the question, if there's an impact on just having it enabled, and there's absolutely no impact at all. The only change would be that you obviously see the type of project selection that Aisha showed when you create a project to kind of understand which one you want to, kind of which paradigm you want to follow, like branching or what we now call legacy with draft and target. Only if you then go into the product setting of an existing product and click on the migrate button to kind of make a current draft target product into branching, that would have obviously the impact of being irreversible, but just having it enabled will not change anything of any of your workflows or setups. And people obviously don't see like the whole new branching UI if the product is not migrated yet. In fact, you can have both types of projects running along at every time. And then we see, do we get a diff view for merging? I know that comes along, right, with the being used to work with branches. And right now we just have to kind of like the hard resolve of either A or B, but the whole UI and the flows and everything is already designed so that you can have a diff view. Still, you will have to run the merging calculation and then see the diff view that will then include seeing the difference for every instance of every change, meaning key comparison, language comparisons, And all the fields that are branching relevant, you can click through them. What we have seen while kind of testing it, the diff is coming. Yes, the diff is coming. The diff is coming towards the end of the year, hopefully before end of Q3, but more likely in Q4, because of the impact of the merging calculation if you make selective changes all the time. But it looks good from the design, and I understand that is what we're coming. The same is with cherry picking just as well. So what is known as cherry picking is just taking a couple of changes that were made on one branch and copy it over to another one without having to run the merge. So it will be a multi-selection option to just select 3 strings and just promote them accordingly. And then if I tie the app to a certain branch using the hash ID and it happened to delete that branch, will update my app. So right now you cannot delete branches exactly for that reason. You can only overwrite them and change them. And then the idea is for the future, if we allow deleting branches, then they will also default to what is configured the default branch. That is how it currently works with any integration where it cannot find a branch. So the logic is already there, but right now we don't allow yet to delete branches because we first want to see how people use it, and then we kind of cautiously enable deleting them as well. And yeah, I had some pricing questions, but I think we covered those. Please reach out if you have further questions on that. Within iOS, can we point our app to different targets to pull a translation for different branches? That's a good question, actually. Theoretically, I would say that should be possible. I think nobody tried it yet, but it should be possible, right? Like the iOS SDK, you can configure like branches in the plist, basically, like in the plist and in the SDK configuration of the Applanga SDK, you can say this version, this target of the app should get this version, this branch from Applanga, so it should technically be possible. But please have a look. Please feel free to reach out so we enable it for you, and you can play around with that. It's interesting. Right, and yeah, as Aisha said, we will send around this recording. And we will send the documentation to branching. There's a general article, and then all of the integration documentations. There's a specific paragraph about how it will be used, but most of all, it's for the integration. It does not have an impact. It's just an additional parameter to say this should point to a Applanga project and then branch X or Y. And as we said, it's backward compatible, so you can already start to set up your project with all the branches you have, and then move the integration step by step. Platform by platform, and then roll out. It's right there. There's another point. People asked us about in projects about bloat, so that basically you just have one project and you keep on uploading to the same project, and you end up asking yourself, of all these strings that I have in Applanga, which one I actually still use with the current app version? And this could be now resolved by just creating a new branch, clearing the branch on Applanga, just deleting everything out of it, and then uploading again, so you only have in every branch what is really specific to your latest version. Kind of have a cleanup there as well. For the same reason, we also have a tagging feature in the SDK that we're rolling out, so that the SDK kind of tells the strings which are belonging to the version. But yeah, and thank you for the feedback, Martin. We all think it's a pretty big thing for enabling all kinds of even more complex and developer-driven workflows. So we're happy to see it as a progress as well. And happy for you to reach out, everyone, if you want to get your hands onto it. And at some point, it will just be commonly available, but for the next month or so, we will just cautiously rolling out step by step. We have some people already using it, but we just want to make sure that if we give it out all at once, that not if there's anything with it, we have extensively tested and developed it, but if there's anything to it, that not everybody runs into it at the same time. And as we say, we want to be cautioning you to use the example project first. Like, go step by step, go as slow as possible, because it's a migration, right? It should be as cautiously as possible. But yeah, reach out to us if you have any questions about that as well. Cool. I don't see any more questions. People already trickling out, but I'm happy to give everyone like 10 minutes of their time back. We will be sticking around for a moment longer until you all found your way moving on. The recording will now stop because I don't see any more questions. Let me end it here and stop.